Hello, I'm Dr. Shawn Andrews. Welcome to the 2020 HBA Annual Conference. It's a pleasure to be here today. All right, what we're going to talk about this morning is leadership, emotional intelligence, and gender, what you need to know to advance your career. Now, these topics were the subject of my doctoral dissertation. And when I started my dissertation in 2010, the statistics about women in the workplace were just started to be published in the mainstream by McKinsey, Catalyst, and others. And like most people, I was shocked when I saw the statistics, but I was also really curious about what was behind it. Why in this day and age don't we see more women leading our global organizations? What is holding us back? Why don't we see gender parity in leadership? So I did my research, I conducted the analysis, I did my interviews. When I boiled it all down, what I realized is the reason we don't see more women leading has nothing to do with women's skills, competencies, or knowledge. It has everything to do with our perceptions of women as leaders, as workers, even as mothers and as wives. Perception is powerful, and for many women, it impacts promotion as well. So today we're going to talk about the leadership gender gap. I'm going to give you the latest statistics. We'll talk about emotional intelligence and what that looks like from a gender perspective. We're going to talk about what the barriers are to leadership for women and some men. We'll talk about gender culture, which is a piece that I find most people are completely unaware of. And finally, I'm going to leave you with a lot of practical strategies. Okay, let's start off with the leadership gender gap. So women represent about 47% of the US labor force. That's all occupations. So almost 50%. This is where we tend to sit, just under 50. That's pretty typical. Sometimes it does fluctuate and shoots up. In 2008 with the economic recession, women's share of the workforce actually shot up to 58% at that time. It has since corrected itself. Women make up just over half of all management and professional occupations, such as physician, attorney, and other occupations where you would earn a degree. Women make up 60% of all bachelor's degrees in both the US and in Europe. That number has held steady now for several years. When you look at the number of women on board seats, we make up about a fifth, about 21%. And the number that's really used as the main barometer for how we're doing on gender parity is this number. And it's the number of female CEOs at S&P 500 companies. So as you can see, as of this morning, I checked it, we are currently at 6.4%. When you look at the rest of these numbers though, you would think that number should be bigger. It should be a natural transition, right? So women have been in the workforce for about 40 years in large numbers, ever since the 80s. I went back and did the calculations, and the average percent of female CEOs at S&P 500 is 5. So some years we go up to 6.4 or 6.2. Then the next year we drop down to 5.8. Then we're 4.7. Then we shoot back up to around 5.2 again. So again, the average is 5% though for 40 years. So we really have been unable to crack that 5% number. Now, for those of you who are quick at math, if you're doing the numbers here, 6.4% of 500 equals 32. So there's 32 women who have been able to reach the highest office in corporations. So this is just a partial list. You may have heard some of these names. Mary Barra at GM, Gail Boudreau at Anthem, Adena Friedman at NASDAQ, Julie Sweet at Accenture, or Kathy Warden at Northrop Grumman. So the image on the left here, on my left, perhaps on your left side of the screen, if you remember your Greek mythology from high school or college, that figure is Sisyphus. So Sisyphus was punished by the Greek gods by having to push a boulder up a mountain only to get it near the top, and it rolls all the way back down for eternity. So tasks that are considered both laborious and futile are referred to as Sisyphean. So when it comes to gender parity. There are days when I feel encouraged. I hear about women being promoted into leadership roles. I hear about companies launching a new diversity and inclusion initiative, and I feel encouraged. And then I look at the numbers and I see that we haven't moved the needle significantly. And it feels like we have to start all over again, and that boulder rolls right back down that mountain. So as a gender and leadership researcher myself, I had to really think seriously about this and say, is trying to reach gender parity futile? Is it futile? Can we actually make a difference that impacts industry? Can we change the face of leadership? Can we change how we envision a leader? I'm happy to say the answer is yes, we can. We may be doing it one woman at a time, but every woman who advances in her career is a step up that mountain. So let's talk about emotional intelligence now. So emotional intelligence, no doubt you've heard the term. It's been around since the 80s, quite popular in mainstream media and in our corporations. So it's essentially your people skills, how well you can adapt and connect with other people. And it's evident every single day in our behaviors. So in my research, I looked at emotional intelligence from a gendered perspective. So just to help level set everyone, here's the formal definition. It's a set of emotional and social skills that is collectively establish how well we perceive and express ourselves, how we develop and maintain our relationships, how we cope with challenges, make decisions, and even manage stress, and then how we use all that emotional information to guide our thinking and action. So again, essentially, it is your people skills. So I'm curious now. Now I know we don't have polling and chat enabled on this video, but I want you to think to yourself, which gender do you think is more emotionally intelligent? Well, you know, what's your first instinct? Would you say men? Would you say women? Perhaps you don't know. But which gender just do you think is emotionally intelligent? So the answer is men and women are actually equally emotionally intelligent overall. But we have different gender-specific EQ strengths or competencies. So in millions of people who's taken EQ assessments worldwide, in general, women tend to outscore men in areas of empathy, social responsibility, and interpersonal relationships. Those three areas. Men tend to outscore women in areas of assertiveness, stress tolerance, and self-regard. Another name for self-regard is confidence. Now, what's really interesting about this data is this is also how we're socialized. Women are socialized to be empathetic, are expected to be empathetic and great at relationships. Men are socialized to be assertive and confident. So it's really interesting that our emotional intelligence traits manifest themselves in the same way that we are conditioned to in society, and in the same way that that society expects us to. So in my research, I interviewed women. I gave them an EQ assessment followed up by in-depth interviews. The women that were naturally higher in the female-specific attributes shared stories with me. They said that if they were an empathetic leader, which many of them were, that people perceived them as lacking substance and intelligence. And that somehow, if they were empathetic, they couldn't be analytical. Now, is that true? Can you be empathetic and analytical in the same person? Absolutely. But this was an overwhelming perception and bias that they experienced, is that if you're empathetic, especially in a leadership role, you might be lacking a bit in the substance and intelligence. And that simply is not true at all. I also heard other stories that when they expressed emotions at work, they were told to keep their emotions in check. So one story that comes to mind is a vice president that I interviewed in pharma. She had her annual work performance review with her boss, and they were talking through a difficult issue with one of her direct reports, and she started crying. So they talked through it and worked it out. And then she noticed, it was a few months after that encounter, but she noticed she wasn't getting the special projects and assignments that she used to get. And she was able to link it back to that encounter with her boss. And what she realized is that her boss now viewed her as unstable or unable to handle stress. So he was not giving her those special projects. Now, what's interesting about this individual as well is she was highly competent, successful, had a track record of success, matter of fact, in both the US and in Europe, leading divisions. She was confident, competent, and up until that point, there wasn't an issue, but her outward expression of emotion, in this case crying, changed his perception. So I bring this up because we are emotional creatures. For some women, crying is just a natural part of who we are, and it's not, we don't always cry when we're sad, we cry when we're happy sometimes, and that's okay. But in men, on the other side of the coin, the number one emotion that men tend to exhibit at work is anger. So we still don't have workplaces that are completely embracing of outward expressions of emotions. So it's just something we need to keep in mind as women. But we certainly, you're certainly encouraged to be your authentic self, though. But just keep in mind that some workplaces still, do not fully embrace emotions. Now, on the other side of the coin, I also interviewed women who are naturally stronger in those male-specific EQ attributes. And what they shared with me is they were told to tone down their assertiveness, be more social, and be a team player. So they experienced challenges because people expected an empathetic woman. But these women were not naturally empathetic. It was not their strength. Their strength actually was being confident and assertive and decisive. But they were also met with challenges. Now, I can relate to this. I was raised to be strong, independent, and competitive. To me, that was the norm. I also was raised in a male-dominated industry. So I'm a female drummer. And that's me on the drums at 6 months old. That's my sister also in the picture. But all my life, I've heard things like, she's just a girl, she won't be able to play very well. I heard she's going to play too soft. And I also heard she won't be able to get along with her male bandmates. Now, none of those things ended up being true, but these were people's perceptions of me as a female drummer. These were people's biases of me as a female drummer. So I bring up these examples to illustrate the point that for women, it's often difficult to succeed as a leader because of these opposing expectations. Whether you're stronger in the female-specific EQ attributes or even the male-specific EQ attributes, women often experience opposing expectations. So let's look at the barriers to leadership. Why don't we see more women leading? So first of all, what I did is, I looked at all the data, all the different reasons, and I put them into 4 main categories. So this is the first category. It's institutional mindsets. So this includes gender bias and stereotypes, agentic leader behaviors, and role congruity theory. So the image in front of you right now, these are stereotypes, obviously. The female brain, you have a big area for chocolate, you have a shopping lobe, you have musicals and sitcom area, a gossip lobe, and perhaps maternal urges and weddings. The male brain, you have one big area in the middle, surrounded by job stuff, a beer lobe, TV remote control, computer fixation, and one commitment neuron. So the problem with stereotypes, it's not that they're inaccurate. Some of these are true. I certainly agree with the chocolate one, but not all women are into shopping. Not all men are into sports, for example. So the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue. The problem with stereotypes is they don't account for individual differences and nuances. That's the crux of it. What agentic leader behaviors are is when we hold certain beliefs about behaviors needed to be successful in a role. An example is a female leader in the military. A woman may be a fantastic leader, but she may not be met positively by her platoon or troops that she leads because she's in a role incongruent with the female. Actually, that's role congruity theory. I'll go back to agentic in a minute. The other side of the coin for role congruity theory is a male nurse. A man can be a fantastic nurse, but he may not be met positively by the patients he cares for, or even the other nurses he works with, because he's in a role considered incongruent with a male. So role congruity is based on bias. Now, what agenic leader behaviors are, what that means is when we think of a leader, so if you just think for yourself, when you think of a leader, what characteristics come to mind for you? Oftentimes I hear from audiences, competitive, decisive, manage stress. I hear sometimes aggressive, visionary. I rarely hear empathetic, socially responsible, interpersonal relationships. We rarely hear that in our leaders, but those are traits that are certainly important and essential in leaders. So when society thinks of a leader, we tend to think in male terms. That's what agenic means. It means when we associate leader traits with male traits. And so essentially what we need to do is we need to change how we envision leaders, because leadership, it is changing, and our definition of leaders is evolving. And so we need to start thinking broader about what a leader is. Another type of barrier is what's called structural barriers. So this includes lack of access to informal networks, and of course, role models, mentors, and sponsors are in this category. These are all different types of barriers for women. So lack of access to informal networks, that includes the old boys network, which is still alive and well. It includes sporting events, going to drinks and dinner after work, taking clients out for golf, fantasy football leagues, those types of networks. So if women are not invited or don't know about these networks, or even people of color, if they're not invited or don't know, they're losing out on important relationship building opportunities that could help their career. So think about the setting for a minute. So let's just say a sporting event, or let's say you're taking a client out to play golf. You're in a relaxed setting, you let your hair down, you share personal information about yourself, you get caught up on the latest company intel and industry intel, and the most important thing is you build quality relationships. Now, informal networks, they're never on the org chart, right? But it's an important part of how work gets done. So if we have certain groups in our workplaces not participating in these networks, it does impact not only the workplace, but an individual's career. Role models, we still need more female role models. Female mentors, it's actually good to have a mix of male and female to get different perspectives. And then male sponsors. And this audience, I'm sure, is very well versed in these areas, so I'll just touch on it quickly. But it's important for women to have male sponsors in addition to female. And the reason for that is twofold. First of all, most decision-making positions of power are still held by men in virtually every industry across the globe. So the chances of having a male advocate, a leader advocate for you, the chances are that's going to be a male leader. The second reason it's important is for optics. It often carries credibility if a female has a male who's advocating for them behind closed doors. So that's something to keep in mind as you're developing your career. Another type of barrier is individual mindsets. So a fair amount of women hold themselves back for different reasons. For some women, going back to the EQ, some women it could be confidence or assertiveness issues, but not all women. Many of the women that I interviewed shared with me that when they looked at the top and they saw the politics and the 60-hour work weeks, they wanted no part of that. And that's okay. So women often want different things than men do, and that's perfectly fine. So what the data shows is women tend to get about to the director level and either settle in or self-select out of the workforce. So a very small percentage actually goes on to vice president, president, or the C-suite. Now, office housework is a term that's been around for several years now. It's a great term. So when you think about it, what might it include? It's taking the notes, it's bringing the coffee or the donuts or the bagels, it's scheduling the next meeting, it's cleaning up after the meetings, following up. It's often planning the holiday party or the next event or function. it's even taking time out to mentor the new hire and spend some new time getting a new hire up to speed. So all of these types of activities are important to keep a company running smoothly. Here's the downside. These activities are time consuming and they often don't get recognized because they're behind the scenes. So men, as opposed to doing these types of activities, men tend to volunteer for activities that are more visible, like sitting on optional, it's like sitting on cross-functional teams or attending optional meetings. So my recommendation to you, if you are a woman who tends to volunteer for these types of activities, is don't always be the first to raise your hand. Allow your colleagues to participate. And the other piece of advice is if you're in charge of planning the next event or meeting, don't ask for volunteers, because inevitably 9 out of 10 times, if not 10 out of 10, women will step forward. So assign people. There's no reason that John can't take the notes and Bob can't bring the coffee or the donuts or whatever it is. But that way, if you assign people, it ensures an even gender distribution. And then the fourth category is lifestyle choices. So this includes work-life balance, family choices, and breadwinner caregiver roles. So let me touch on the last one for a moment. So in today's households, most households have dual income. So both parents are working, or they're single parent households. So if a woman is the primary breadwinner of her household, she's usually the primary caregiver as well. And she usually has the lion's share of the household duties, the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, doing the dishes. If a man is the primary breadwinner of his household, he's rarely the primary caregiver. This is a key distinction even among our youngest generations. Even among millennials, is what the data shows, is that millennial men are better than older generations at the household duties, but the lion's share of the caregiving still falls to women. Now, this is a really important issue right now. It's always important, but it's magnified right now because of COVID. So the latest McKinsey Women in the Workplace study that just came out last month showed that 1 in 4 women are considering downshifting their careers or leaving the workforce altogether because of this issue. So most of the caregiving duties, in addition to trying to manage your career full-time, is falling on mothers. And so that's what's driving that statistic of that 1 in 4. So this equates to millions of women that companies can potentially lose that talent and also lose future female leaders. So it's a huge talent drain on our companies, and it could significantly impact women in the workforce. Okay, so let's shift gears for a moment and talk about gender culture. So I think this next slide sums it up perfectly. Okay, the mission, should you choose to accept it, is to go to Gap and buy a pair of pants. The male is the blue line, female is the red line. 6 minutes, $33, he has his pants, mission accomplished. 3.5 hours, $800 later, she has those same pants. So this is just a whimsical look at some of our gender differences. Let's take a more serious look at how these show up in the workplace. So because of our hardwiring in our brains, so our neuroanatomy, we have differences in our neuroanatomy, and how we're socialized, which starts at birth and carries into the we carry into the workplace as adults. Men and women approach virtually every aspect of business differently. So this is not about rights and wrongs, it's simply about differences. We have differences in how we work within an organizational structure. Men tend to prefer hierarchies, women prefer flat structures. How we conduct our meetings, how we network, how we interpret information, how we communicate, working in teams, solving problems, taking risks, and even how we lead, we have different styles. And by the way, it's these differences that is precisely why we need gender balanced leadership, for the simple fact that men and women think differently and behave differently. Okay, let's look at problem solving. So this is a really obviously an important area, how we solve our problems in life and at work, and how we make decisions. So men tend to problem solve, and again, this actually ties into our hardwiring as well. Men tend to be like a laser. They use convergent thinking. So they'll converge on a problem, they'll eliminate any extraneous variables, and they'll solve the problem expeditiously, quickly and expediently and efficiently. So that's convergent thinking. Women, when they go to solve a problem, they're like a radar. So women think about things, they pick up cues from their environment, they think about how it's going to impact them, the company, their colleagues, their customers, their work-life balance. So women take many factors into consideration first, and then they make a decision. So then this is called divergent thinking. So both approaches are perfectly good ways of solving problems. We need to have an awareness of these issues, and we need to value both ways of solving problems. So oftentimes in a work environment, women are pressured to have the convergent style, which is the laser, just make a decision quickly and move on. But we need to take more time to value the divergent thinking, or the radar style. So there's pros and cons to both of these. The convergent thinking, it's very quick, it's efficient. The downside is that you could miss other alternatives that would have been better. So you may just miss those, and you may have to repeat the process again because you missed other better alternatives. The divergent thinking is great because you do take into factors into account, but it takes longer. So again, there's pros and cons to both, and one's not better than the other. They're both perfectly good ways of thinking, and we do need to recognize and value both ways. Okay, so let's talk about communication. So obviously we have differences in how we communicate. I'll give you two examples. When it comes to success and failure, men tend to point inward when it comes to success, and they'll say, I worked really hard on this project and I did it. Finally, congrats. When it comes to failure, men tend to point outward, and they may blame it on external factors, or they may say, I really wasn't into it anyways. Now, when it comes to success for women point outward, just the opposite of men. Women often give credit to their team, or they may say, I just got lucky, or it was the right time. When it comes to failure, where do you think women point? And I'm sure you're shaking your heads, but inward, just the opposite of men. Women often will take the blame, even if it's not their fault. So we can learn from each other here. Men can learn from women by giving more credit to other people. Women can learn from men by learning to own your successes. So if you're always attributing your success and your achievements to external factors or other people, it's going to be hard for your boss or your colleagues to link it back to you or attribute it to your efforts. So it's really important sometimes for you to own your successes. When it comes to listening, we even have differences there. So in a conversation, if you picture a conversation, men tend to sit back, stoic look on their face, very little body language, and they will nod when they're in agreement with what's being said. So men tend to sit back, and they may nod once or twice during the conversation. That's very typical. Women tend to nod continuously. And what women are saying to the speaker is, I hear you, keep going. Now, why women do this is because women focus on relationships. We've been socialized to focus on relationships. And we're also hardwired to focus on relationships. So because we care about relationships, we're nodding and we're telling, yeah, I'm with you, keep going. Women may not be agreeing with what's being said, though. This is a really key difference. So let's take a female who may have a male boss. Let's say they're in conversation and they're talking and she's nodding, yeah, got it, boss, got it. Let's say 2 hours later, she goes in his office and brings up ideas on how to improve the project. In his mind, he may see it as insubordination because 2 hours ago, she was agreeing with everything he said. So it's not insubordination. For women, women are trying to improve the team and make the team better by bringing suggestions. But because of the nodding, we often miss each other. We miscommunicate. And so this is a really common area where we need to simply understand our differences in how we listen. And then finally, leadership. We have, so there are over 30 different leadership styles out there. 2 have been linked to gender: transactional leadership and transformational leadership. I'm sure you've heard of these terms. So transactional, just like the name says, it's based on an even exchange of transactions between leader and follower. I'll do this for you, you do this for me. I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. It's extremely common in business and politics, and it's also called quid pro quo. It's associated with male style of leadership. So it's strongly linked to male style. Transformational is very different. Transformational is based on collective problem solving and decision making, collaboration, and communication. It's also driven by emotions, long-term goals, values, and ethics. Women naturally have transformational leadership traits, naturally. This is a good thing. So, and what's even better is lots of data, dozens and dozens of studies have confirmed that transformational leadership is the type of leadership that we need in today's highly competitive matrix organizations. So here's how you can improve your transformational leadership. Leverage your listening skills, leverage your empathy, leverage your relationships, and leverage your collaboration. Those 4 areas will help you be an even better transformational leader. And here's some cool data. It shows that individuals who are effective transformational leaders actually score high in emotional intelligence. Okay, so what's the take home of all this? The take home is that these are very different perceptions. These behaviors cause very different perceptions, but they have a very real impact on promotion, particularly for women. So here's some strategies. So what can we do about the gender culture piece? That's the piece we just talked about. I have 3 suggestions for you. First of all, reinterpret the opposite gender's intent. So you may scratch your head and say, why is he behaving that way? Or, you know, men may say, why is she behaving that way? So the opposite gender may act in a way that makes no sense to us. But people do things that make sense to them. People are, and if that's the case, they are usually often acting in a way that's consistent with their gender culture. So it may make no sense to you in the female culture, but in the male culture, it makes perfect sense. So simply reinterpret why they might be acting that way. The second suggestion is to flex your style by modifying your behavior to be in sync with the other person. Perhaps you may need to check your nodding, for example, if your manager or your boss thinks that you're agreeing with him. You know, maybe dial that back a bit. You know, when it comes to meetings, and I haven't talked about this yet because just for time reasons, but men tend to have a meeting before the meeting, and they do that to line their ducks up and maintain their place in a hierarchy. Well, in the male culture, that makes perfect sense. It makes no sense in the female culture. So sometimes you may have to have a meeting before the meeting to help appease your male colleagues and put their mind at ease. So that's an example of flexing your style to be in sync. The third suggestion is to talk about differences and best ways to work together. We should be discussing these differences and laughing together about these differences and talk about how we can leverage these different strengths. Okay, finally, my advice for women: be authentically female. You offer tremendous assets to today's organizations, and your skills are highly relevant to business and leadership. Believe in your vision, what you notice, like your gut or your intuition, your relationships, your empathy, and your communication skills. These are all strengths for women. Have confidence in those strengths and your knowledge and your ability to figure things out. I'm going to spend a moment on this one because it's really important. So when men are approached by a project they've never done, they have no experience in, Most men will say, okay, I got it, I'm on it. And what do? They go figure it out. They'll go Google it, they'll talk to a colleague, they'll look it up, they'll read a book, whatever they need to do to learn about that, project. If a woman is approached with a project she's never done, or doesn't have any experience in, most women will say, I don't have experience in that, never tried it, but we can bring in a consultant, maybe another department, and we can give it a try. Now, if you're a busy manager and you just want this project taken care of, which one sounds more confident or competent in getting that project done? The male. So here's something I would suggest to run a little experiment with yourself. The next time you're approached by something you've never done, say, boss, I got it, I'm on it. And you go figure it out, just like your male colleagues. This tactic has worked for decades for men. Okay, here's the bottom line. And this is what I want you to take away from this example. Men don't know anything more than women. They simply act as if they do. And again, this tactic works for men. If men say yes, or yeah, boss, I got it, I'm on it, they don't know any more than their female colleagues, but they go figure it out. Most of the time, more often than not, this works out for men. They accomplish the project. What do they get out of it? They get experience, and that experience builds confidence. That leads to opportunity. So here's the bottom line. The world needs more women to say yes. Say yes more often. That will lead to experience, opportunity, and confidence. Now, worst case scenario, let's say it doesn't work out and you fail at it. What do you gain? You still gain experience. So there's really many more upsides to saying yes than there is to saying no. So I would implore you, say yes and take the risk. Speak up for things you care about, try new things. Leverage your networks. Women tend to have bigger networks than men and also more diverse, but we don't leverage them as much. So tap into those networks. Get mentors and sponsors. Change your language and your self-talk to be more empowered. Women are much harder on themselves than men are when it comes to negative self-talk. Support other women. A lot's been said about that. It is slowly changing and we need to lift each other up. Rising tide lifts all boats, right? Learn the business, strategic, and financial acumen necessary to be effective. These 3 skills, women often aren't pulled aside and taught. And so if you don't know, basic finances about your company or your overall strategy, learn it. Learn just enough to be able to communicate the basics. And finally, if leadership is your goal, start thinking about that today. So I want to leave you with this. How do we achieve gender parity, and how do we close or help close that leadership gender gap that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation? This is how we do it. It starts with talking. Talking can transform minds. That transforms behaviors. Transforming behaviors can transform organizations. That can transform the world. This is how we get there, to become more gender parity, more gender equality. So with that, I will leave you with my contact information. I'm more than happy to connect with you on social media. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. There's my email. I also have a free download on my website if you're interested. It's a 25-page Power of Perception workbook, and it corresponds with every chapter in my book, as you see there. So this presentation today was based on my book and based on my dissertation research. So that's a free resource if you're interested. With that, I wish you the best of luck in your career. Thank you very much.